have an announcement to make to y'all, to the people of America.
The mothership has landed. It's the Classic Guitar Rock Podcast.
Atomic batteries to power. Turbines to speed.
Ready to move out. Before we start, I'd like to say something. There's no reason why you shouldn't have complete confidence in your chances to come out of this thing alive and in one piece.
From coast to coast, from border to border, from one end to the other and all points in between. The Classic Guitar Rock Podcast is on.
Yes! That's awesome!
We crank up and break down the great guitar-driven rock of the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And you are invited to come along.
We got a full tank of gas, half a pack of cigarettes, it's dark, and we're wearing sunglasses. Hit it.
And now, your host, Jeremy Lunnan.
Yeah, we don't know anything about that fella there. Who is he? Where's he coming from?
It's time for the Classic Guitar Rock Podcast.
Well, welcome back to the Classic Guitar Rock Podcast. We're super excited to have you with us. I'm really excited. Today, I'm being joined by one of my lifelong friends, J.R. Stanton. Hi, J.R. How are you?
Hey, doing well, Jeremy. Doing well.
Good. I want to just give folks some background on J.R. J.R. and I went to high school together back in Oklahoma. We played in a world-renowned power trio for a period of time called War Chicken, right? And I still remember
War Chicken.
We only had one gig. It was a radio station Christmas party at Carriage Hill's apartment in their little party.
A New Year's celebration.
A New Year's celebration for the ages, yes. And we broke up after that.
Artistic
differences, or perhaps lack of talent. One or the other.
Well, you could argue both quite effectively.
Yes, but we played together. We did a lot of stuff together. We made documentaries together. We did all kinds of stuff. Here's a neat thing about JR, though. JR was an elite level wrestler. He wrestled at the college level, and he's also a physical therapist. So he can break your back, but then he can rehab you also.
I can fix it.
Good.
In fact, I thought about that initially in the profession after my first injury. Is that, man, a guy could make a lot of money doing this.
Yeah.
So of course I pursued that lifelong dream, and no longer am I hurting people without getting paid. Now
That's right.
Definitely get paid.
You get paid for it. That's good. And you and your brother, between you and your brother, and I had another good friend in Montana who was a wrestler. I have been full Nelson'd and I've body slammed by the best of them. I've been thrown around by some of the best wrestlers.
Yeah, looking back, I'd like to go ahead and just give a full apology on that. I do realize now that there was times when you couldn't actually breathe.
Yeah.
Maybe I should have let go.
Thank you very much.
I was a different guy back then, Jeremy.
We all
changed.
Yeah.
Young, rock and roll. I had hair.
He had hair. In fact, JR was what we call an early adapter, right? He had, I'm thinking of the various hairdos you had, different colors.
Yeah.
Different lengths, styles.
Yeah, they called it a fool's tail at that point. I don't know. It grew out and eventually became a mullet. And of course, I couldn't keep it naturally the color it was. I needed to somehow be more flamboyant. So we went with red. Of course, red, as we all know, fades to pink.
Yes. Yeah.
And made me a little bit tougher wrestler after that.
I bet. So that was some motivation there. That's good. But super excited to have JR on, and you'll have to forgive us if we get into our 15, 16-year-old goofy mode, because we've both matured to about a 16-year-old level, but we may step back a little.
I've been accused of that.
Yeah,
yes.
It could happen. And we will be talking about a great album that came out in 1989. And I wanted JR to come on. Well, a couple of reasons, because he's a friend of mine, but he's more of a subject matter expert on this album than I am. I mean, I've been aware of it on the surface level, and I've known, Firewoman and some of the songs off of it. But I thought it'd be fun to have JR on to talk about it because this is an album that he's dug into a little bit more. So we will get into that here momentarily. But first, a few news items that I wanted to cover really quick. Now, since we last got together, and JR, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this too. We've lost two very important musicians over the last week or so.
Iconic.
Don Everly, of course, of the Everly Brothers, passed away, and Charlie Watts of the Rolling Stones passed away. Now, JR and I, this is one thing we both have in common, and probably more so for JR even than for me, is we both grew up with parents that listened to a lot of music.
Encouraged from the get-go. Can you name that tune? And,
absolutely. And I remember at your house, in fact, JR, I spent a lot of time at JR's house. JR's dad loved being out in the garage, listening to the oldies station and hearing a lot of this music. So I'm sure the Everly Brothers is something that JR was exposed to. I was growing up. And
exactly,
I think the impact, the influence of the Everly Brothers really can't be understated. I would say that without the Everly Brothers, there wouldn't have been a Beatles. I really believe that. I think that they influenced the harmony sound of the Everly Brothers. You think about the British Invasion bands, the Hollies, so many of these bands that came out of the early 60s and later 60s were influenced by the Everly Brothers. A big.
Can you still hear some of that? I think even, it's if we're still talking about like Dream and things like this, the songs that the Everly Brothers were so known for, they persevered, and I think again that's probably why you can as a young 16-year-old in 1980 something, you could pick up a 45 off of the Everly Brothers and kind of still relate to it. That music and the good music tends to transcend.
Absolutely. And you think about, and this seems funny now because the image of the Everly Brothers is now, they were very clean cut, they were maybe considered safe, but at the time, like Wake Up Little Susie, that was a controversial song, right? Exactly. That was a controversial song. You hear a great song like that. And that's just like you said, music like that, great music like that transcends time. And 50 years from now, people will still be listening to the Everly Brothers. And 100 years from now, there are just certain artists that transcend time. And Charlie Watts from the Rolling Stones, who we also lost. He's known for his understatedness. I don't know if that's a word. Is that a word, JR? Understated.
I think it is. So we'll make it.
It's official then. Okay. His understatedness, right? He was not a flashy drummer. He was solid, and that's what he's known for.
Flawless in some ways, yeah. I think that the fact that he's holding down the beat, and I don't think those guys get enough credit. But obviously, he did it without the flair. He just showed up and he rocked it.
Yeah, so. and not just the way he played, but the way he was. Right, he was steady. I mean, that's the word that describes him. He was steady, and he was married to the same woman the whole time he was in the Stones. He was the opposite of a rock star. He came, he played, he did his job. One of the best stories I ever heard, JR, was one night Mick Jagger calls Charlie Watts in the middle of the night, all drunk, and he says, "Where's my effing drummer? I need my drummer." And Charlie hangs up on him. And then first thing in the morning, he gets dressed in his suit and tie. He goes to Mick's hotel room, knocks on the door, punches Mick right in the face and says, "I'm not your drummer. You're my singer."
Perfect.
Yeah. And, it's just, he's just a class act. And I say this all the time. I don't mean to sound like a broken record, but sadly, we're only going to hear more and more of this about these iconic musicians dying, passing away because they're getting into their 70s and 80s. So unfortunately, this is going to happen to all of us, right? So I think it's important we at least remember those folks and celebrate their music. And yes, it's sad that they're gone, but at least they've left this great music for us to listen to. Charlie was always my favorite Rolling
Stone. And that's the legacy of music. That's kind of why we're talking about it now, right?
Absolutely.
Because it does give you, it transports you.
Yep, absolutely. You had one little item that happened in 1989 on this day. Yeah, and I just want to make the connection here because the album we're talking about is from 1989. So on this date, September 2nd is when we're recording this. This happened, JR. So share that with us.
Well, again, in my grasp for trying to find something relevant to the podcast, I did a deep dive.
Mm-hmm.
I looked at this time in history, what significant music involvements had happened, and in this case, I came across Ozzy Osbourne, and since there are some ties into this album, as you mentioned,
mm-hmm.
I read this, and in this day in history, Ozzy was charged and indicted on accounts against abuse or spousal abuse to Sharon, and later on, that was reduced. He didn't go to prison. He was allowed to attend rehab service and become rehabilitated that way. But I'm not sure. Again, it's diving deep, but it is relevant because anything Ozzy does is irrelevant. But you alluded to something too. If in reading that little article, we're not clear that maybe Sharon didn't put the smack on him. I don't know.
Well, that's and we don't want to make light of domestic abuse, right? But no. When you said that, the first thing I thought was, I would think Sharon's much more likely to be the one putting the smack on someone. But just an interesting little tidbit that happened on the same day. So when we come back, we're going to dig into this great album from 1989. We're talking, of course, about Sonic Temple by The Cult. It's coming up right here on the Classic Guitar Rock Podcast.
Attention! If you live in Spokane, Washington, and have teeth, this message is for you. Braun and Jarvis Family Dentistry knows teeth. Incisors, bicuspids, canines, molars. No tooth is too big or too small.
I was delighted and impressed. So impressed, I bought the company.
With Braun and Jarvis, you'll have the sweetest grill in the inland Northwest. And let's be honest, nobody wants a funky grill. Braun and Jarvis Family Dentistry. 509-464-2391. That's 509-464-2391. Braun and Jarvis Family Dentistry. Quality dentistry that doesn't suck.
Exclusively on ESPN Plus, UFC 313, Saturday. Reigning light heavyweight champion Alex Pereira defends his title against #1 contender Magomed Ankalaev, and an explosive lightweight bout between Justin Gaethje and Rafael Pazzi. UFC 313, Saturday at 10 p.m. Eastern. Buy it on ESPNplus.com/PPV.
Now, we're up to our long-distance dedication. And this one is about kids and pets and a situation that we can all understand, whether we have kids or pets or neither. It's from a man in Cincinnati, Ohio, and here's what he writes. Dear Casey, this may seem to be a strange dedication request, but I'm quite sincere, and it'll mean a lot if you play it. Recently, there was a death in our family. He was a little dog named Snuggles, but he was most certainly a part of... Let's start again. From coming out of the record. Play the record, okay? See, when you come out of those up-tempo goddamn numbers, man, it's impossible to make those transitions. And then you got to go into somebody dying. You know, they do this to me all the time. I don't know what the hell they do it for, but goddamn it, if we can't come out of a slow record, I don't understand it. Is Don on the phone? Okay, I want a concerted effort to come out of a record that isn't a up-tempo record every time I do a damn death dedication. It's a last time I want somebody to use his brain to not come out of a record that is that's up tempo, and I got to talk about a dog dying.
Welcome to the basement. It's the Classic Guitar Rock Podcast.
Welcome back to the Classic Guitar Rock Podcast. I've got my friend JR with us today, and we're talking about the album Sonic Temple from the Cult in 1989. This is a great album. And JR, I have to tell you, like I said, I had kind of a cursory, I knew their hits. I play in a dad band where we play She Sells Sanctuary and Wildflower. So I play 2 Cult songs, but I've never really dug much deeper than that.
Oddly enough, not on this particular album.
Yeah. So that's why I wanted you here. I think it would be great. So I want to start out by just you kind of sharing your first exposure to this album and just your thoughts on this album.
Thank you, Jeremy. I'll tell you this. I think that my first experience being introduced to the Cult was more from a driving sound, not knowing who they were. I didn't catch on. I wasn't on the boat early. I didn't. This is the first album I heard for the Cult. I was not around for Electric. I wasn't a big fan at that time. I'll be honest with you. It sounds like similar stories have been told on this podcast where older brothers introduced music. This came on the radio. Man, it caught my attention. My brother happened to have the album, so I knew of them. I just didn't know much, but I remember that as Sweet Soul Sister and Firewoman and such, as they hit, and I was hearing more of them, it was like a teenage attraction. I have to say it was similar to like, that girl you see and you're going, hey, I think that this is somebody I'd like to know. You're dying to get into the adventure of spontaneity. Those relationships kind of develop that way. And, you've got that infatuation period. And I'll have to tell you, the music in the radio and everywhere I cruised around, this song was playing, this group was playing. And the reason why is it was so unique to me. It was a very unique sound. You try to think back to the influences that they might have had. But again, at that particular time, 1989, 1990, and through that time frame, I was just plugging stuff in, to the radio or the CD player, and you would take this music and it'd be a soundtrack for that period. And so for me, I liken it to again being engulfed in that moment where you're infatuated with somebody. You're not quite sure what the true words are to express that particular moment, but in that moment, it's everything. It's that driving beat, the affection for that. I tended to think, I think we build up those relationships in teenage years anyway, but at this particular time, I was out of high school, but I became quite infatuated with the sound, the beat. It draws you in, and I think that's what pulled me into this particular album. I don't know that we ever got a second date. I love this album. I fell in love with them. And for me, the album itself was iconic. And there's several reasons why I feel that way, Jeremy. We'll probably go into that.
Yeah, I want to come back to one thing, and without getting too cosmic, but you said something. This is the magic of music, right? There are 2 things. I don't want to get too psychological here, right? But there are 2 things that trigger memories for me, and I think this is with a lot of people: music and smells, right?
Yes.
You hear a song and you talked about it. It transports you back to that time, and all those memories and everything that was going on at that time floods back. Smells have the same effect for me, anyways. You smell something and you're back at your grandma's house or whatever. But exactly. That's the power of music. And even though sometimes you can't put it into words, what it was, you said it, right? Something about the sound, the ambience that drew you into this album. And here's the thing. Until we talked about this album a month or so back, JR, I'd never gone back and listened to the whole album. So having spent the last couple weeks listening to it, I kind of regret the fact that I wasn't enjoying this, since 1989. I'd hear Firewoman, and I thought that's a pretty cool tune. I'd hear Sweet Soul Sister, and I think that's a cool sound. But I never dug deeper, which is the case on a lot of songs. And to be honest, that's one of the great things that has happened to me since I started doing this podcast, is I'm intentionally digging into albums that I just kind of had a cursory exposure to and finding there's a lot of cool stuff.
When you grab a hold of that album, Jeremy, I don't know if you know how many Cult albums you might have had in possession at one time or another, but I mean, this one stands out. You've got Duffy right up on the front cover, pick in hand. Mm-hmm. It's a very posed, very powerful silhouette of him striking the guitar, and I mean, these are things where you go, hey, that's a rock album.
That is a rock album. Yeah,
exactly. And you know what's interesting though, Jeremy, I go back to that time frame and that time in what was hitting on the radio. Okay. In 1989, January, we're talking about Bobby Brown, My Prerogative.
Yeah.
I'll Be There for You, Bon Jovi. When I See You Smile, Bad English. Good songs, right?
Yeah.
Blame It on the Rain, Milli Vanilli.
Milli Vanilli.
You know, hey. Yeah. But that's the thing. There was nothing that sounded like Sonic Temple. So when you put that starkness, that edgy kind of rock and roll grit that they had, but they were a lot more styled. And I think that was interesting because I tell it like this. If you've ever on the back patio discussing with your friends, you know, who sang that song back when we were in high school? You know, was that Poison or was that a Warrant song? Or exactly. No one ever says, man, was that a Cult song? No, because I mean, Ian Astbury, he just put it out there. His voice was very, very much a trademark, a very iconic brand for that. And, you know, that's I think sometimes blessing, sometimes curse. Because, you know, you are locked into that. You hear Ian Astbury's voice and vocals, and you know immediately, you know, this isn't Warrant. This is not Bon Jovi. There's no other one streaming in that venue in that time period. So, you know, I kept thinking, what else was I listening to? You know, and again, so when I look back to the time frame, this had a stark contrast. There were other bands trying to do other things, but the Cult was doing this. And in my mind, it was the best album. Certainly, it was their most commercial album successfully. Mm-hmm. It produced 4 hits, and all top 20 hits. And you know, as you roll down the number ones, I just think that sometimes they got misunderstood.
Yeah, and I think part of here was me, right? Here, this is me. I was guilty of this, right? And I guess I don't need to apologize because this is their sound, right? Here's one of the things that truly makes them unique. If you go way back, their very first album, and even pre the Cult, when it was Ian's first band, the Southern Death Cult and the Death Cult that followed, they were very much an alternative goth band. And what is truly unique is you add Billy Duffy to that, and it's like it's still got the stylings of the alternative stuff, but just ripping guitars. And
I think that you know, we talk about what Billy Duffy had, that part of it, you know, it must have been something strong because Ian only had to hear that riff and that song, and he dropped his band. That original band, Southern Death Cult, was his band. He had put that together, and he left them.
Yeah.
So, and it was all because of he said he heard what Billy was laying down, and it's on the, hey, we're getting chicks with our music, but this is a different level. This is what I need to put myself online with. And, you know, what he was able to do with that Southern Death Cult and such, they certainly had good fanfare. But it's interesting because they said they were akin to some early goth.
Yeah.
They likened that cyber type music to early goth.
I almost hear like The Cure. You know, when I hear some of that early stuff, I think of The Cure, which I like that. I mean, I like a lot of that music. And then even at the time, the early days, to see Billy Duffy, you know, he looks like he's a new wave alternative guy. But
got that severe flat top.
He's got the flat top going on. But then you hear his guitar, and this guy rocks, you know. And so that combination of Astbury and Duffy, and let's be honest, JR, that's the band. Right. That's the common denominator. Everyone else is kind of Spinal Tappy, right? Revolving doors, change the drummer every album, you know.
Everything revolves around that one nucleus. Again, sometimes your best strength is sometimes also your weakness. And I don't know that was necessarily an accurate statement for weakness. Obviously, they persevered. But as you go through the laundry list of notables that were in part of that band, or in that band at one time or the other, it's interesting. I tried to nail down what would be a good number. And I finally settled on 22 past members associated. And oddly enough, mostly drummers.
Yeah, a lot of drummers.
It reeks of Spinal Tap-ish moments when, where I don't know what quarterly happened to that drummer. He just was no longer in
Fortunately, there was no spontaneous human combustion.
Well, that would have taken it to a whole other level of firewoman. But I will say that Ian Asbury had a ton of soul in terms of the indigenous and Native American population, and he transcended a lot of things spiritually into his music that way.
So tell us about that. Tell us about his history, because I thought that was a very interesting part of his history. He did not grow up in England.
No, he obviously started out in England, and then they went to Canada, and he actually spent time on a reservation and became molded. If it had to have had a profound effect. This is a common spiritual theme that he wants to carry through from the get-go. I don't know. I mean, the death cult, the original Southern death cult, that's a derivative from a Native American origin. Now it's right. North American. It's not just Canadian, but it had to do with a true religion that was of Native American heritage. And so I don't know that I wasn't able to confirm his actual heritage, even though I've heard ringlings that he claimed to have Native American blood as such. I never found any evidence in just looking, but I will say, I mean, this moved him because a lot of his wardrobe, a lot of his thoughts, a lot of his lyrics hinged around that sanctum of okay, this is how we treat Mother Earth. This is spiritual. You hear him talk in interviews. He talks about being very spiritual. Right. He also talks about things, that being a sensual rock man, not essential, a sensual. And so he's obviously in touch with that side. And he was able to do that. I think when you see his wardrobe, it speaks volumes. He's definitely not afraid.
I saw this, just confirming what you said about it, kind of some conflicting things. I had seen an article, not an interview, but an article that mentioned he was Native American or had some. But then I saw in an interview when he himself said, I'm a white guy. He said, I'm a white guy, but I am interested in this culture and have been inspired by it and draw things from it. And
interestingly enough, I mean, I think there's some controversy that eventually emanated from that later on. And the album cover.
Let's go ahead and talk about that, because that to me is kind of ironic that here's a guy that's so passionate about, I call them Native Americans. That's kind of
we grew up in Oklahoma.
Ethnocentric term, right? Native Americans are Indians, but actually this is in Canada, right? Canada. And that's what's ironic is he was such a proponent of the indigenous peoples, but then he gets sued.
Yeah, he gets sued. And, you got to wonder if that didn't leave a little bit of a sour taste, because, he has all these choices as to what he wants to hold out in front. And you put front and center a Native image of a young, obviously proud of his heritage, Native American male. And it isn't until there's some success behind that, of course, some controversy comes out. I kind of wonder controversy if again, it sells albums too, but in this case, it hurt him. They were unable, the judgment that was not in at the time of the release of the album, so they had to delay the release of the album in Japan. A lot of things that would have financial impact. And so you wonder, again, what kind of band the Cult would be if they hadn't shot themselves in the foot on multiple occasions.
Right.
But sometimes by their fault, sometimes by just the circumstances. For whatever reason, I don't think you fully grasp the impact of what happened with the lawsuit, other than the fact that he had a lot more to lose over that. They could have gone, and he referred to that as a stock photo. He really didn't have any known relationship.
For those that don't know, is their album Ceremony that came out, was that in 94?
94, 95.
94, 95. Ceremony comes out. It has a cool picture. The picture on the front is a little Native American boy in a ceremonial Native American clothing, right? And they were sued by this little boy's parents for $60 million. And Ian said, we bought a stock photo. I mean, that was available for sale. The photographer had rights to it. And so they were sued. And I think there was, to your point, this probably was a blind side to them. Now, one thing that does come into this, which is interesting, is in the video for this, I can't remember the song, one of the songs from that album, there's an image that shows the photograph of the little boy burning. You know, there's some symbolism there. They didn't mean it was directed at the little boy, right? Mm-hmm. But this boy, who by this time was 8 or 9 or 10 years old, he sees this video, and in his culture, right, that's a symbol, not a good symbol.
Not right? a good. They didn't take it as a positive.
Exactly, and that led to this. And I'm sure the last thing Ian wanted to do was hurt anyone's feelings. But on the other hand, and I've even heard him say this. I was surprised when he said it, knowing how he feels about indigenous peoples. He even said in this interview clip I saw that he said, "I think it's a case of people seeing an opportunity to make money from tribes or because of tribes, and that's what's happening here."
Of course, but you can't talk about any of the cult albums without having a discussion on that matter, because I think that, we want to know what drives music. Well, Fire Woman, it's straightforward. It was he makes no bones about it. It's about his influences over, in his image of Native Americans. Right. That's where he drove from to drive those lyrics. And again, what I love about the cult is they have that kind of very recognizable hammering vocal that always comes back to something like Sweet Soul Sister, something Sweet Soul Sister. Yeah. It makes you want to jump out of your chair. And that kind of music, I think it imprints you. I'm sure it imprinted me.
And the we call it a hook, right? Songs have hooks. They have vocal hooks, they have guitar hooks, and you have got a combination of great vocal hooks and great guitar hooks. I mean, that line it's not on this album, but She Sells Sanctuary. That just delayed guitar line intro is just infectious. Wildflower, the same way. Fire Woman. I love Fire Woman. That part's cool, but I love listening under the verses, the more muted things that are going on the guitar. It's awesome. And the textures this is why it's the best of both worlds. You take the swirly, chorusy textures of alternative new wave music, and you combine Angus Young guitars, and that's what you get. And it's a great combination.
Well, I think you hit it with textures. I mean, I love how they come into textures. You may notice that Ian's always saying something like, "This is where it all ends."
Exactly.
When they start the album, that's the first thing. He comes in with this mumbling. Is that part of the song, or is he talking to the sound crew? This is where it all ends. And then, bam!
But
that's Sun King, and he comes in and it's just kind of a slow burn. It's got it's building up. It's got an open chord starting off. Boom! He opens up, lets it sound. So you've got a tandem there between the lead singer and the guitar. How many bands are built around that anyway? But you got that tandem where if Billy's not hitting those things right about that same time, it's not the same song.
Right.
So, but he leaves enough room. The lyrics leave enough room for improvisation. And I think that Ian takes advantage of that. Right. So, you could hear him say things that I've listened to it and go like, what did he just say?
What did he say? There's a lot. And I'm sure a lot of that is just off the cuff, right? It's as they're recording and he just says something. But here's something funny. Matt Sorum, who came in, didn't play on Sonic Temple, album, but came in and toured that album. And a little band called Guns N' Roses was opening for the Cult, right? Yep. And then imagine that, how funny that is. And then, of course, they become massive. And Matt Sorum eventually goes to GNR.
Well, let's look at that. I mean, who was the band The Cult when this album came out? And then you got to wonder, are we talking about the album, the studio component? Because I don't know. I mean, the drummer at that point on the demo in 88 was the Kiss
Eric Singer.
Eric Singer. Yeah. And he's in there in the studio
and here's
laying down the demos.
Here's the thing, JR, you've probably heard this on other episodes. You can connect every band to Black Sabbath, and Eric Singer was in Black Sabbath. And so Eric Singer here has a part in the Cult story. Of course, Eric Singer has played with pretty much everyone. I
was going to say we would call him a journeyman, right?
Yeah.
He's been in everything.
Plays with Kiss. He played for Alice Cooper. He was in Badlands. He was in the Cult shortly. So yeah, there's a Black Sabbath connection. But let me make this point about Matt Sorum, because what Matt Sorum said, because we talk about two sides, right? It's a double-edged sword. There's a funny interview I saw with Matt where he says Ian can sing, right? Ian can sing, but he was his own worst enemy. And he was talking about lyrics. He says, here, Ian's singing about butterflies and rainbows and all of this stuff and flowers and all of this. And he's like, if he maybe would have not been so ethereal, maybe they could have been even bigger. And then had he not done some weird things, there's the whole story of them opening for Aerosmith. This is the first night of the tour. They're opening for Aerosmith. I don't know. Sorum was there. So this must have been, they were touring this album. So this was Aerosmith's Pump. So Pump is at the top. Aerosmith's at the top of the world in 1989. Huge. After Permanent Vacation, I was working in radio at the time. That Pump album was massive, and Aerosmith was probably the biggest band on the planet at the time. So here's the Cult opening for Aerosmith. First night of the show, stage manager tells Ian, he says, okay, don't walk out that ramp. There's a ramp with a big hand at the end of it. He says, don't walk out. Don't use the ramp. Okay, they go on and play. First song, Ian Astbury runs out on the ramp and is jumping on the hand that Steven Tyler is going to be using later, right? And so as soon as the set's over, the stage manager is furious and he fires him. And Matt Sorum says, wait, hang on, let me go talk to Steven really quick. Apparently he knew Steven Tyler. He had a relationship. He goes in and says, look, Ian's from England. Okay, they don't use the word ramp. I don't know what word they do use, but he says that he didn't understand what you meant by ramp. And so they kind of smoothed that over and they were able to continue touring. And that's just indicative. There's other examples of him saying things or doing stupid things.
Well, he ends up blowing it afterwards anyway. I think that, I think what happens is when you put that much magnitude of ego in one, as an opening act, I don't think the Cult wanted to be the opening act at that point. So at least Ian, I think, again, however they met, Matt Sorum does have some good stories.
He did. Well, yeah. And so let's talk about the Bob Rock thing, because this is important. So the Electric album, they had Rick Rubin. Now, Rick Rubin, he's worked with literally everyone, hip hop artists, country artists, Johnny Cash. I mean, he's ZZ Top. He's worked with literally everyone. And there was a time when Bob Rock, 90s, he was it. At one time, he was on the 100 most influential people in the world list. And so way back in 80, when did they do the Electric album? 87, 86, 87, probably 87. So Rick Rubin does that album and it's a rock album. Okay. So they went from this chorusy guitar alternative band to this AC/DC riff oriented band, which is great. Wildflower, it's phenomenal. Okay. Love that album. It's ripping.
Yep.
What I like about Bob Rock, and he even says this, he said, I wanted to keep the riffage, right? I wanted to keep that hard rock edge that Rick Rubin brought out of him, but I didn't want to lose all the cool jangly stuff that Billy Duffy did before that. And so that's why I think Sonic Temple is the best of both worlds. You're bringing back a lot of the more textural ambient stuff that you had earlier, but you're also keeping the crunchy guitars that Rick Rubin.
It was the best of both worlds, and you're catching a band in transition, and you don't always catch that on a recording. And I do think that Bob Rock was able to capture that, and in much the same ways like what you said when we listen to songs like albums. I know you did some work with Def Leppard Topic recently, and the difference between High and Dry and what Mutt Lange brought. Right. Sometimes it's not the members in the band so much as it's trying to put texture to the music in such a way that it may show a little bit different light to the same talent. Right. And these guys certainly have talent. There's no denying that. And that chemistry that was going on was was translated over to the album. And again, I talk about it being infatuated. That's what, maybe that's what the piece that melded this for me is that I fell in love with that. I again, keep harkening back to this one album when we spoke initially about what album do I like? Well, this is it. I mean, I listened to after, I've listened to before, but I come back to this one. There's something here that, that still has the magic. You're going to grab a hold of the steering wheel. This thing's in the radio. It's playing, and sweet soul sister. You're going to, you're going to look over and you're going to be banging heads.
Yeah, it's a driving song. What I mean by that is obviously rhythm is driving, but it's a great song to listen to in your car, right? With your window.
And that's, again, I actually use the same term when I'm on my notes. Is this is a driving kind of a crescendo, and it's syllable. The syllables are such that you're going to go boom. This is easy to say. It's going to hit in your head. It's going to be there for a while.
Here's something I want to ask you about. There's positives and negatives about approaches, right? We talked about Lennon and McCartney, Joe Perry, Steven Tyler. Here it's Asbury and Duffy. And I can't remember who they've had a revolving cast of characters on bass and drums. So
they kept Jamie Stewart on bass up until this album. And in the studio prior to touring, it was Mickey Curry on drums. You got Mickey Curry coming off of Hall & Oates, and moving into this position. And, of course, interesting enough, he goes on. I mean, he leaves shortly after the onset of the tour. How do you go into the tour and go, okay, we have a new drummer. Yeah. But in this case, they said he eventually went on to be with Bryan Adams. I'm not sure I couldn't find any reasons why Mickey was out, but needless to say, we got Matt Sorum in.
Yeah, so Matt's in, and whoever the bass player, okay, so it's got to be after Sonic Temple. Maybe they're working on the follow-up album. And the bass player, whoever that was at that time, I can't remember, he has a riff, and he makes a suggestion. He says, hey, what if we did something with this? And he says, and this is Matt recounting it, and Billy just looked at him and completely deadpan just said, Ian and I write the songs. Okay. We'll tell you what you need to play. and he kind of later whispers to Sorum. He's like, well, what are we even here? I was like, right. I don't know, man. But that's that flip side, right? Is that what made them so good? Was it, they kept it all in-house between the two, or if they would have let other people come in, would it have been? Because you could say the same thing about Fogerty and CCR. Fogerty, same thing. It was all Fogerty. He did everything. And you can argue that, hey, that's why they were successful.
Yeah, the genius of Fogerty. Yes.
Exactly. Or you could say, if they would have let other people do it, maybe they wouldn't have had a revolving door all the time, which would have meant maybe they'd have better stuff. So that's the age-old argument. But Ian and Billy were very much the driving force. And just like all the other partnerships we know in music, they had a lot of conflict between themselves.
True. Yeah. And I think again, that's the piece about being tied. So these guys probably know each other better than family. And so that you may be at the highest of the highs, but you've probably also enjoyed some of the lowest of the lows. and I know that these guys had some out on tour because that trickles out. But I know that Matt Sorum, when he went to the audition, thinking, hey, he wants to get this chance, he was really excited. And to the same point, Billy afterwards leans over and tells Matt, hey, you got the gig, but you need to quit smiling so much. and it's like, well, maybe they do want to control the image. They talk about the image, and you look at a lot of the pictures now, and I there's pictures where Matt Sorum's there, and I guess now I put a smile on his face. But you look, Duffy is just hard-nosed. I mean, he looks like he's getting ready to kick your butt. Right. So he wanted to control not just lyrics, not just melody, but image. And even in the later interviews, they talk about the imagery. And so I think as artists, that's a little bit too much control for other artists. There's no room. There's no more room. It's a vacuum in some ways because those two talented people suck out all of they suck up all the energy. And
Sorum, to me, he's a rocker, right? He's a basher. He wants to play rock and roll. And I'm sure image plays part of that too. But here's, and I don't mean this to sound, well, it's kind of a negative critique, but I sense in the Cult the same thing that happened with Black Crowes. Okay. Black Crowes, the first album, they were awesome. Mm-hmm. Second album, really good. But then they started to believe their own press, right? Then it became more about image than about music. And they just became pompous, arrogant jerk nozzles, right? Yeah. And I sense some of that. You see Ian, it's like, how outlandish can I get with my next costume? Mm-hmm. Billy never got that bad. Billy had his own kind of more stripped down image, right? He has a lot of different haircut. He had the JR,
he explored the boundaries. Yeah. It's interesting because you look at rock fashion, and I think Billy pretty much matriculated through most of those fashions.
Yeah, he did. But Ian was very much, he's wearing like crazy things on his head, and it's
that fur hat.
Fur hat. Yeah.
Do you know that actually drove another cottage industry? You can go on like Pinterest, and there's special hat makers who use that as their trademark, as Ian Astbury style headwear.
Yeah. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that.
I'm not going to lie, Jeremy. I wanted one of those hats, man. I'm not patronizing here. The reason I know that hat sells is because I looked it up, man. And if I thought that my wife would let me get away with it, I'd be wearing one of those hats right now, today, brother.
Well, you could get one and just wear it when your wife's not around.
That's true. But, I could bring out my inner Ian. But some of those moves he throws, I even the years in wrestling and the style that I thought I had, I'm sure that I would be the one in therapy because, he just dances across, like floating across the stage. One of the lyrics he uses is prancing like a cat on a hot tin shack. Yeah. And I have to tell you, some of those moves he throws down, you're going like, yeah, he's just
dancing like, yeah, he is. Yeah, that's great. Okay, so let's actually go in, JR, and talk about the album. We don't have to necessarily break down every single track, but I want to at least kind of touch on the high points. The first song, Sun King, let me just say this. I think this is a great lead-off track. It's a great song. I love this song.
Yeah, it's kind of a slow burn. They start off building you up, and it kind of sets the mood for where the album might go. Mm-hmm. And for me, that was, again, I like Sun King. It's certainly I'm not alone. Mm-hmm. We look at what tracks climb the charts. This is one of them. And yeah, it had a slow burn. It built up. Again, they slammed the open chord initially. They let it ring out. And then it kind of tells you, hey, we're getting ready to slap you in the face.
It comes.
And that gets you ready. It gets you ready.
Yep. It's a good opening track. And then, of course, a Firewoman. There's a reason. To me, when I look at this album, this is a song I think about, right?
Mm-hmm. I think it anchors it.
Yeah, it's a great song. I love this song. I already mentioned I love it's easy to fixate on that main guitar riff, but what's going on in the verses underneath, that's to me even tastier than just the main riff. But it's just a lot of energy. This song is just a great song. I love it.
Yeah, and Ian hammers out those lyrics there at that kind of, well, that's their signature. You hear that, like I said before, there's not something where you're going to have to guess. I wonder who I'm listening to. When you hear it, you know who this is, and it's very trademark to that duo in the Cult. So if you had to say a signature song off the album, it's Firewoman.
Yeah.
It performed really well. It's one that's endured along with, several others, but for me, I agree. Firewoman spoke up, and that's the one I was singing, on the way to work. I was like, okay, here we are, and this morning even. So it's there. I'm not sure what others thought of me, but yes, I was on fire for Firewoman.
Firewoman. It's a great song. And
you know what's funny? You liked American Horse a little bit.
I love American Horse. It's a great song. And again, this is a song I would never have heard, right? I'd never heard it before, just until the last couple of weeks when I've been listening to it. But I love that song. And there again, some of that. I keep saying Native American, but it's not just Native American. It's indigenous.
And that's partly because of Canada. You got to figure that he was in Canada when he got the exposure. So it's an overtone or an undertone, however you want to put that, but it's definitely an influence.
Yeah, but a great song, of course. Another one, and I didn't realize it. I didn't realize this was actually kind of a hit, but Edie, the Chow Baby song. I think
it stands alone. I really don't think there's another track on the album.
I love it.
Like Edie.
I love that song.
But I'll be honest with you, Jeremy. I look at that and wonder, why? I mean, I love what he did with this, and I'm not sure. I'm sure. I actually feel like in my mind, I see Ian, seeing this image of Edie Sedgwick, who the song is about, and he's posing questions like why. From what I could tell, here you're talking about another American tragedy.
Tell us the backstory here a little, because that's something a lot of people aren't aware of.
Edie Sedgwick was kind of the it girl. In fact, she was actually named by Vogue magazine as the it girl. She came out of the Andy Warhol group that were known as Youth Quakers. She was certainly part of the factory girl scene. And Andy was surrounding himself with a lot of young individuals who he promoted because it created an air for him to move his own art and be in touch with what was hip. And I think that may be what Edie saw there. She was certainly a young debutante. I would liken her to Paris Hilton in some ways.
Right.
There's no need for notoriety. There's certainly money in the family. She had some mix-ups along the way, but something had to be attractive because this is definitely a divergence from any Native American or indigenous people's theme. And here it's on the album Sitting Square, and it gets a lot of notoriety. Yeah. So she ends up dying, and it's a tragedy. It plays very much like the Marilyn Monroe kind of a starlet sort of a scenario where she's been done wrong by leaders in the industry. She actually had ties to Bob Dylan, and interestingly enough, there's some dialogue that says that Bob broke her heart, and that's part of the reason that led to her demise. So I think that how does that jump over into the cult? How does he discover? And that's kind of what I wanted to see out of the research, digging this up. What I did get is a lot more of a big taste for Edie Sedgwick, and certainly she was the Twiggy of that period. She's credited with a lot of fashion influences, and then the tragedy that you see of losing someone at a young age. And there's speculation that it was suicide, and I think that's why in the actual lyric is, why did you kiss the world goodbye, Chow Baby?
Right.
And so I think Ian, maybe he's reaching out much the same way Elton John does when he talks about the loss of life with Marilyn Monroe.
Right.
So your artists tend to be very emotional, and something hit him, and he translated it well on this particular track. It hit me. I liked it. I did want to know, because I'll be honest with you, I didn't know I didn't know what to think about the title. I really didn't realize that Edie was someone's name. I thought I could hear Chow Baby.
Right.
But, again, with Ian, he surprises you. And that's that was a pleasant surprise. Certainly that particular track stood out, and it has good legs on its own.
Yeah, it's a great song. That's one of my favorite songs on the album. Then, of course, Sweet Soul Sister, phenomenal song, a hit song, right?
And again, that's Sweet Soul Sister. I mean, you can say it, but man, you got to sing it too.
Exactly. It's hard to say it. You got to sing it when you say it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So no, again, Sweet Soul Sister, another one of the four that landed upward of the 20 mark on the hits. Mm-hmm. So certainly I know that it was interesting because Billy Duffy said he wrote that they put this album out because they needed an American platinum album. That was the driving thing. Right. It's almost like he said, we need to do a platinum album. And so this is what we're going to do. And I'm thinking, why just his quote is attributed to the point that he was wanting to gift that to the audience. And I'm thinking, okay, well, there's again a hearken to that arrogance or that creative juice that says, hey, we know where we want to go with our music. We don't want to be hyper commercial.
Right.
We want to touch veins that say, hey, you guys we deserve that level. And it's interesting, again, platinum. So it
worked.
It worked, whether it was prophetic or what, or maybe he's hindsighting it, who knows? But Billy's on record as saying that this was the gift. This was something that they wanted to do that would be a platinum. So, and it's not apologetic in any way. He just says, maybe a little more commercial in some ways. And I think that they're a kind of band that was probably always searching to grow.
Right. Now, this album came out kind of at the end of the vinyl era, because by now we're fully into CDs coming out. Cassettes are still being made. And I only bring that up because, if I remember it at one of the radio stations I worked at, we actually had this album on vinyl. Mm-hmm. And my point is, I prefer side one to side two. Side two is not bad, but I think side one, and I'm trying to remember, I think it ends with Sweet Soul Sister is at the end of side one. I can't remember. And then
I think you're right.
The other ones, Soul Asylum kicks off side two. If I had to, you look at side one, okay, every single track on side one is a killer in my opinion. Side two, they're not bad, but it just, to me, doesn't have the same oomph as side one.
Again, there's a divergence. You look at New York City and Hell's Kitchen. I don't know whether he is a DMZ. And not a typical lyric you'd throw in there. Hell's Kitchen is a DMZ. And you're like, okay, not sure that's one I'll sing. Not in mid-America. I don't know. It doesn't come off like Sweet Soul Sister. So I get you. It's not rolling off the tongue, but it does tell you that they were going to diverge. They're going to put other artistic talents in towards to these lyrics, and some are going to fall a little shy of what initially was attractive to us. Right. But it does expose you. It opens up. So I agree with you. I wasn't, again, having plopped this CD into the tray, listened to this round the clock. It wasn't because I was listening intently on that second side, but I did pick up a lot of it. So right. It's good music. There's nothing wrong with the way it drives through. It's certainly memorable in its own way. But yeah, I don't think it's the same infatuation I had with the front side.
And here's the thing, right? As artsy fartsy as Ian is, he knows how to write a hook, right? Mm-hmm. And between the two of them, between he and Billy, they can write hooks, and there's a craft to that, right? And that's what draws me in. Again, it's that mixture of the chorusy, textury, alternative stuff with the crunchy guitars. I almost laugh when I see them listed as a heavy metal band, because to me, they're not heavy metal. You listen to them versus Judas Priest or even a hard rock band of the time, and they're completely different. Both cool, but completely different. And so you can't really call them a heavy metal band.
But it's interesting for this standpoint. You tours support albums, right? There's a marketing aspect of this. The Cult had the choice. They had a choice: Ozzy Osbourne or Metallica.
Yeah,
and it was a conscious choice. Now, you and I, Ozzy.
Yeah,
we'd be heading with Ozzy. But the thought, Billy Duffy is on record saying that he just thought the Ozzy crowd was too Black Sabbath and Ozzy centric and wouldn't get a grip on their what they were trying to bring. He thought, again, Metallica was young. Mm-hmm. They're more akin to the same age. So they're thinking this is a vein in which we could plug into the rock. And sadly, I don't think that the fans, I don't think it, in terms of as the tour went on, I don't think the fans appreciated the Cult as a Metallica opener. Right. As much as what we'd hoped. And I think that, again, Billy's trying to use this as a springboard to say, we want to go see places in America. They want to be back. They want it to be a kind of a chance to be exposed with the young talents like Metallica.
Mm-hmm.
So he's thinking Metallica, but make no mistake, they got booed. In fact, if you read some of the books some of the literature that Matt Sorum puts out about some of the things that they had to endure, obviously the fans came to see Metallica,
right?
And it's hard to vision, but the Cult wasn't enough for them, so not all venues. And so it is interesting because of the fact that what was on the radio. And if that's what I was saying, you got to figure what were we listening to at that time?
Yeah. And I think that's the challenge they had are we going to appeal to the hard rock metal fans? Are we going to appeal more to the pop fans, more to the alternative fans? So they're kind of straddling all of these. I don't know if you can straddle three things. You really can't, can you?
So I don't know. It'd be tough.
Yeah, but they're straddling these three potential markets. And to your point, they opened for Metallica, and it was not always good for them to be opening.
Portland evidently was a terrible experience because it's mentioned many times in the interviews as to the different things, antiques that were played, but harsh crowds, and I think it does take a toll on the group to be told. And the critics weren't nice to them. I mean, if you go to just any of the resources that you look at, you read what their critics are saying. They're not being kind. I mean, words like stupid. I mean, wannabe classics, things like this. So in testament to the Cult and to Ian and to Billy and the guys that did it, I mean, you have to have thick skin if the people are calling you that and you're still churning out good music. They knew their vein, and it almost like they had to fight to get that. So I do like it. I appreciate the album for that context. And it for me, again, it was a love affair that I could get from those driving quarter riffs, kind of riffs, and seeing what Billy was throwing out. Interestingly enough, I had to have take a toll on the group, and that may be the answer for why there was such a turmoil of members. Ian goes on after to explain why the band had such turmoil by saying that the pressure of doing such a long grinding album and follow up through tour, that he really felt that the band had reached a breaking point. He said the pressures of doing this for so long, the wear and the tear of being on the road, the pressure that it creates to make a record of this nature, we should have taken a break, but we didn't. That's his answer. We went straight into ceremony, and of course the strife that associated with that. So
let me throw something out here, and I don't want anyone to laugh when I say this, right? But I am a huge Carpenters fan, and I just watched.
I'm not sure I needed to know that, Jeremy.
I just watched a documentary about the Carpenters, and surprisingly, I'm watching this documentary at the same time I'm kind of watching documentaries and videos about the Cult, and there were so many similarities, and it all came back to the pressure. Right? The pressure of always having to be on, always performing, the physical pressure. You're traveling with Karen. It was exhibited with weight loss. Her brother, Richard, was addicted to sleeping pills. And they're this squeaky clean group. Karen Carpenter, one of the greatest voices of all time, by the way, but the same thing with the Cult, right? And with almost any band, if you look at it, just the grueling nature of being on the road and the demands of great guys, you're back from a successful tour. Now let's make another album. And it just goes on and on and on. And we see that repeated with the Cult, where the toll that it takes on them personally, on their families, on everything. Yeah, it's kind of sad, really. When you look.
And then who was left after that? Think about it. Matt Sorum goes on to Guns N' Roses.
Yeah.
This is the last album that the bass player plays on. It comes down to that they're reforming.
Yeah.
Sometimes
they're reforming for every album, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so I don't know that it takes away. I don't know that I would want to say it distracts from who the Cult was or the music, because we said it earlier, the driving forces, all the lyric component, the melody component really was emanating from those two personalities. Yeah. And it was interesting to see how that relationship, and then how it imploded. And sometimes some of the most beautiful art comes out of pain, and maybe that's where they were investigating.
Yeah. So I do want to bring up one thing that I thought was very interesting, which I was not aware of this. Ian Astbury was the first person that was approached to play Jim Morrison in the movie The Doors, right? Yeah. He was the first one approached, and he didn't want to do it because he didn't like the way that Morrison was being portrayed. He was a big Jim Morrison fan. Yeah. And that's when Val Kilmer, who did a great job, then they got Val Kilmer to do it. But it's just interesting that Ian Astbury was their first choice, and I could totally see that. He would have been great in that role. And he actually toured with the other members of the Doors as the Doors. And that was a whole nother legal debacle where
exactly. It's almost like he was drawn to conflict. What's the odds
exactly.
in one lifetime
to get all of this? So there was a lot of drama around that, but it was just interesting that this was the guy.
There's some similarities there too, Jeremy.
Totally.
Because again, one of Matt Sorum's knocks on the departure and such on his way out, he said at the end of the tour, I mean, Ian had pretty much become a straight out alcoholic.
Oh yeah,
his weight had soared up to new heights, and it was affecting his vocals. And I guess the rift that came between Billy and Matt was Billy felt like Matt was Ian's drinking buddy and part of the problem,
right?
That was leading to this demise. And so that may have been the writing on the wall right there. But it might be worth noting that, of course, Jim Morrison, after, when his hiatus from the Doors or exit from the Doors, certainly he was of the same nature. The weight was a problem. It affected his ability to sing. His level of cognition at times was questionable.
Mm-hmm.
So, there's a quote saying that Ian was muttering through in between lyrics on stage, losing the audience because they couldn't follow. But, that's kind of his hallmark. I kind of thought he like, this is where it all ends. Well, he would always come in with some kind of muttering. So I'm not sure that was, but Matt Sorum, he says that was what it was. And even to the point where Ian was asking him to back up vocals, and they were, he was mic'd up on the drum kit and was singing. And that's what drove Billy to say, hey, you're the enabler.
Yeah.
You wouldn't be losing Ian if this wasn't the case. And that's all from one context. I'm not sure that you can mark that up as being bona fide, but certainly it's it's noteworthy because it does parallel the Doors.
Right. For sure. Interesting. JR, this has been a great conversation. We'll definitely be having you back, but not to talk about the Cult. You'll have to talk about Milli Vanilli. Maybe
I'll have to bring a better game. You're right. I'm more than one horse here. I think I could bring in Milli Vanilli, and I'll be honest with you. I wouldn't be afraid to touch Milli Vanilli, but I don't think it's in the correct vein.
Well, maybe not, but again, I've already admitted I'm a big Carpenters fan. So what have I got to lose?
Let's just keep some of that in the closet.
I just think
guitar rock.
Milli Vanilli was great pop stuff, regardless of who actually sang. There was some good pop stuff if you're a fan of pop music. That's for another conversation.
Okay, exactly. That's for another conversation. I do feel you though. I do want to go on record as yes, I could. Milli Vanilli could probably be heard in my office from time to time. But let's again.
Our commitment to you, the home viewer, is we will never discuss Milli Vanilli again on this podcast.
That's right. It has no place.
Well, awesome. JR, thanks for joining. And
again, my pleasure.
I want to thank all of you for joining. And please follow us on Twitter, follow our low budget YouTube channel. And if you haven't yet, please subscribe to the podcast, follow us, share it. We really appreciate it. We want to say thanks one more time to our friends at Dick Pics in Australia. They make some phenomenal pics. You have some pics on the way, JR. I'm sending you some.
Hey, man, I certainly. This is going to rock.
It's going to be great. So we want to thank Dick Pics also. And we will see you on the next episode of the Classic Guitar Rock Podcast. Take care. Say bye, JR.
Bye, JR.
Thanks for listening to the Classic Guitar Rock Podcast.
Oh, certainly.
Please like, subscribe, and share. You can email us at classicguitarrock@mail.com.
We're not ordinary people. We're they're morons.
We'll see you for the next episode of the Classic Guitar Rock Podcast.
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard. At no point in your rambling, incoherent response were you even close to anything that could be considered a rational thought.